Hey, everybody, welcome to the Ronline Report. Today, we got a great guest. We have the director and producer of a documentary called Dream Big, A Golden Time in the Golden State. It's described in one sentence as a love letter to Southern California, the 1970s, the people in the gym that changed the cultural landscape of the country. Welcome, Mark. Welcome.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks for having me. And thanks to Ed Connors for putting me in touch with you.
Yeah, that was an interesting interview with him. I just read his book, The Three Musketeers, directly before conducting the interview with him. And I learned so many things. And I thought I knew all the basics of the history of golds. And no, I learned quite a bit. So let's start with you, Mark. Where did you get the idea, the inspiration to do this particular documentary?
It started for me when I read Pumping Iron, the book. I was a freshman in high school the year it came out. That would have been 1974. Oh, wow. And I didn't live but 25 minutes from where that was. Oh. So it was it was local and close, but at the same time, it was a world that I really had no idea existed.
Well, let me stop you just a second. I'm familiar with the LA area. Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley.
Oh, okay. I lived in Rosemead, Covina, Arcadia. Yeah.
There you go. I was actually born at Intercommunity Hospital in Covina.
Okay, there you go.
So when did you? Yeah, it's a small world, huh?
Yeah.
Did you move away when you were young, or did you just?
No. I only lived in that area from 1991 to 2000. I'm originally from the Boston area, and that's where I've been back there. But I interrupted your story because I'm always fascinated what part of LA, because we say Boston, that encompasses this entire. Yeah, so
exactly.
You grew up near there. What you joined there as a teenager?
Yeah, I had by 77. So I was a freshman in high school. Obviously, I couldn't drive. And about that age when you hit high school. And I went out for the wrestling team. My brother had suggested, you should probably, if you want to get in shape for, football the next year, Yeah. So, you start as at that age, we're all looking at someone in the weight room brings in Muscle magazine. One of my buddies who I played freshman football with brought in the book Pumping Iron. So that's when at that age, right? I mean, we're all searching our identity in adolescence and trying to get bigger and stronger. And then you see the photos that George Butler took of, as you know, I mean, the musculature of those guys at that time was just unreal. Yeah. And that kind of planted a seed. I started picking up weights. I went from about 135 pounds to about 165. And then that kind of satisfied me for a while. And then I think when I was junior year in high school, I had another buddy that was getting recruited by University of Washington in football. And he was a big Arnold fan. And we went to go see, I think, Stay Hungry. And I'm trying to think if that was before or after we went to Gold's. But anyway, so I get reintroduced to that. And then I just kind of it was just such an odd subculture, but fun. And I think that kind of lit my fire for it. What got me started on the documentary was really we spoke in the pre-interview years later when I saw people on the internet, with just conjecture, what was it really like? Or they said what it was really like. And I'm like, well, some of it's true, some of it isn't. And I worked in broadcast TV for close to 30 years. That's my profession. So I do, video editing, camera, lighting, audio, producing. So I'm like, one, I could combine my love of telling that story because I was there. And number two, I can do it because I have the skills to do it and keep costs down. And so that kind of got me started. I started in late 2015. And between a full-time job and raising a family and then doing this, dragged me across the finish line, I guess.
So you were there from 77, you got there. At that time, were most of the big stars, Pumping Iron was only 2 years before that. So were most of the same characters the same top bodybuilders around when you got there?
Yeah, there was well, I'm trying to think because I'm reading Ed's book now. I read the initial draft that he sent me on PDF months ago. And because we were kind of fact checking each other. Like he's like, when did this happen before that or after that? You know, because we're both like, you know, that's 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But what happened, if you remember, if you read Education of a Bodybuilder, Arnold's book, I believe in the first edition of that book, he mentions that he now works out at World Gym. And I think he said Gold's Gym either no longer exists or he said Gold's was an outhouse and going to World was like stepping into a penthouse.
Oh,
and then he repeated that line several times on talk shows in the LA area, like on Merv Griffin. So Ken Sprague, who had owned Gold's since 1972, he said enough was enough, and he took Arnold to court. And there were Joe Weider testified on behalf of Ken Sprague, Artie Zeller, who was photographer, you know, a famous photographer.
I knew Artie.
Yeah, he was, you know, a hostile witness. He testified on behalf of Ken Sprague, but he didn't really want to get involved on either side, but he got dragged in. So anyway, what happened at that point when Joe Gold started World Gym in 76, that's when Arnold, Franco, and Zane followed and worked out at World, and everyone else was at Gold. I mean, there were some guys who would go back and forth, but there was, in that era, I mean, Robbie and Mike were like, I think, and then like all the top amateur guys were at Gold's. And I mean, there was no shortage of top level guys. At Gold.
Your film, I assume, goes through the chain of ownership, how it started, because I think a lot of people assume, and I think for a long time I assumed Joe Gold was the owner all the way up until it sold to Ed Connors. It wasn't Tim Kimber, it was another guy at the time, and Pete Grimkowski, but that's not true at all. As you said, he sold it, and he started the gym in 65 and sold it in 72, you say, right?
He sold it in 1970.
70, wow. So 5 years is nothing.
No, and now, for guys of your generation, of my generation, or younger guys now, they look and they're like, they grew up in a world where there's 10,000 CrossFit gyms and 20,000 MMA gyms, and fitness is so much a part of our culture. But back then, when I interviewed Ken Sprague, he said that Joe, it never made money. You're talking he basically built it for his buddies, because Muscle Beach got closed down in, I think, 1959 or 60. Right. And so they were working out at the dungeon in the bottom of some hotel in Santa Monica. And so he's like, you know what, I'll build a place where it's close to the beach and we could train there. And it had less than 40 paying members. And he was a merchant Marine. And so he's like, I'll just go back I'll sell it. I'll see who wants to buy it. He offered it to John Balick. John, it's in the movie. I'll send you a screener so you can view the movie.
Please do.
And John Balick said, I didn't know, all I had to do was take over the payments. He goes, but I didn't know how I was going to make any money, and so he sold it to two guys. There were two members in the gym, a gentleman named Dave Sachs and a guy named Bud Danitz. And they were antique deal. Bud Danitz was an antique dealer. Dave Sachs, I believe, was a civil engineer, but they both worked out at the gym. And so if you've seen the facade of Gold's through the years, the original gym, it was very stark on the outside. And then it had like the raised letters that said Gold's Gym. Yeah. And it was kind of a really cool style. And when Danitz and Sachs bought it, they took those letters off and they painted it red, white, and blue, which in Pumping Iron, you see in that beautiful black and white photo by George Butler. So it stayed like that from 1970 to about the time Ken turned it into his house in 1976. Wow. So Bud Danitz and Dave Sachs had it for less than 2 years. They actually weren't, again, they tried to modernize the gym. It only had 2 parking spaces, wasn't making money. And so they were ready to shut it down. They had a shipment of antiques in LA Harbor, and they didn't have money to get it off. the container ship. And they're like, we're going to close the gym because we need money to get that's our business, the antiques. The gym was like a hobby. So they went to several people, and like Ken Sprague said, I think they came to me as a last resort, and I came up with the money, and I asked Ken Waller, do you want to run it? Will you be the manager? Because Ken Sprague had a production company, and so Ken Waller said, yeah. So Ken saved it. Up until that time, Golds had never promoted a bodybuilding contest. Ken promoted the IFBB Mr. Western America, where he paid Arnold and Ken Waller $50 each to be guest posers. And that was the first contest that Golds had promoted in 1972. So, and through that ownership between 72 and 76, when it was still in Venice at that original location on Pacific, George Butler and Charles Gaines had come out to write Pumping Iron, because of the article that Charles Gaines wrote in Sports Illustrated. And then, of course, a year and a half later, they came back to shoot the documentary. So all that explosion, kind of happened, and, under Ken. But like Ken said, when he bought it from Danitz and Sachs, it was Gold's Gym Incorporated, for whatever that was worth at that time. But he said that Danitz had bought a lot on either side of the gym. So he said, I bought the 3 lots about a block from the ocean, and all I had to do was give them a down payment and then assume their liabilities, because they needed cash for the antiques. Right. And Ken says, I never bothered to change the name of the gym. I just left the gym name there. Part of the contract was, though, that he owned Gold's Gym Incorporated, Gold's. And so when Joe Gold came back from being a merchant marine in 1976 and saw that there was a gym that was famous that had his name, he wanted back in the gym business, and he could not use his name. There's another, I don't want to bore you with that, but there's another story of the contentiousness that started between that, because Joe, I guess they drew up some sort of agreement, and Joe couldn't open a gym within so many miles of Gold's. Wow. So Joe says, okay. And he immediately broke that. He broke ground and started erecting a building less than a mile from Gold's.
It's like 3 blocks. I've did that walk many times.
Exactly. Because Main Street turns into 2nd Street, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And turns into 2nd Street by the pier. But he said, I waited till Joe Gold finished the building. He goes, I waited for them to finish everything, and then I served him with the lawsuit. Oh my goodness. And because he's like, it's all here in the agreement. You broke these stipulations of the agreement. So they went back to court, and Joe says, I'm sorry. And Ken's like, I could have shut him down at that point, but I knew the guy just wanted to own a gym. My gym was doing well. And the next stipulation was, you can go ahead and open your gym. You can't advertise your gym in the trade magazines like Muscle Builder and I can't think, I guess IRONMAG, Muscle Builder, and then you can't have photos in any of these magazines for 2 years. Well, immediately within less than 6 months, there's photos of World Gym in Muscular not Muscular Development, Muscle Digest. It was a tiny Southern California. It was actually in Rosemead. It was 2 brothers. They were doctors.
Wang? No,
Wong. Yeah,
Wong. Gene Wong and Dr. Wong. Yeah, because I worked for Lou Zwick, who was the editor of that magazine.
Oh my God, Lou Zwick. Yes, yes.
I worked for Lou for 8 years at American Sports Network in Rosemead.
Okay, so yeah. So anyway, they go back to court, and Ken was like, what's it going to take? You say you're a man of your word. You broke your word twice. I think by that time, Ken's wife, Marion, had gotten sick with cancer, and a very aggressive form of cancer. And so he obviously was moving in another direction. But I think, a lot of the bad blood from World Gym and Gold Gym started there, So that's
understandably so. Let me ask you this: you've played at 7 festivals now, correct?
Yes.
You've won awards at 3 of them. I don't know how much post, yeah, I don't know how much audience feedback you've gotten, but I want to know what your favorite scene in the film is, and from talking to other people who watched it, what some of the favorite scenes of other people have been.
Oh gosh, I think for me, there's a couple. One is, I think, Franco was so enthusiastic when he was speaking about walking into goals and feeling the energy. Charles Gaines talked about this kind of the same thing, where he goes, you walked into that place and it had something that you couldn't buy. It just had a feeling, and I think, if you're a native Bostonian, there's places you walk in that city that you can just feel history.
Yeah.
And I think the original one, it was a lot like that. And I think the way Charles, because he's a great author, he's just so descriptive. And then I think the other thing, when Bill Grant mentions that time and place, and he has a line where he says, the world that I lived in that time was the best world I ever lived in. And I just love that line.
Wow.
So people finding out the chain of ownership, they're like, oh God, I never knew that. And then other people, when they said, oh, I never knew of the parade, or oh, I remember the parade. That was, I remember seeing that. So I don't know if you had a chance to look at any clips, but it references Ken had done a parade to go. He was promoting the 1977 AAU Mr. America, and had the parade, and he had floats and bands and elephants going through the streets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did I see that? I had I got left a whole 3 tubs of these all magazines from the late 60s into the 80s, and there was one that covered both that Mr. America contest. It had 10 pages, all black and white, of course, but it also had, I think, a good 4 or 5 pages just on that parade. And I was like, wow, they really did that? Because that's crazy. Now you can never imagine something like that happening. Parade with pro bodybuilders and top amateurs, like a circus parade going to the middle of Santa Monica.
Yeah. Wow. Insane.
You got footage of that?
Yeah. Wayne Gallish, he supplied me with some footage. He shot some because he would go to the States. He said I would go every summer and try and capture some of the top contests. And obviously he would always make the pilgrimage out to Santa Monica and Venice to Gold. And the odd thing is 60 Minutes covered it. They interviewed Ken for that. And a couple of those sections are in my film. And the ironic thing is my lawyer, with my letter of Arizona missions, what I use from 60 Minutes is covered under terms of fair use, because I contacted YZ Digital, who does the licensing for 60 Minutes, and they said, oh, well, that's going to cost you, $300 a second. Oof. And you want, and the thing that really bothered me about that is you're talking to people that probably weren't even born at that time, or don't even really care about the content. They're just a curator. Right. But what was really maddening was the footage that CBS 60 Minutes has on that, they didn't shoot. It was actually shot by a crew that Ken Sprague hired. Oh. And Ken gave them the footage because he knew how valuable it was when that package, that 5 or 6 minute package, aired on a Sunday night on 60 Minutes, profiling Arnold and Joe Weider and Ken Sprague. Ken knew how valuable that was in terms of publicity. Yeah. So he says, he goes, in one of his moves, when he moved from Santa Monica up to the Northwest after he sold Gold, he said, I lost my footage. He goes, I couldn't find it in the move. He goes, but there was a film transfer done that 60 Minutes has. And he says, otherwise I'd give it to you because I hired the production crew that shot it. So, but yeah, the parade is just, like Wayne Gallish said, it was like a scene out of a movie, Yeah.
I was, believe it or not, I was a film major, but I had very little interest in documentaries. It seemed like they were actually more difficult. trying to track down all this footage must be difficult in itself, but then trying to get the rights or the licensing to use it, I can imagine that because you're dealing, like you said, with people, they don't care about your project. They're just in charge of a bunch of film canisters or old 1-inch tape or something. So how do you make them feel your urgency and the passion you have for this film that you're making so you can get this footage that you need to make this film?
Yeah, that I think it's basically passion. And I had one of my daughter's friends, her father, my daughter's friend's father, he's a documentary buff, and he watched it. And the first thing he said after he called me was, you've sourced a lot of material. That must have. And I said, well, yeah. One, when you're doing a project for the most part all by yourself, it's hard enough because I have to, you have to find the footage, then you have to contact them, and then you have to figure out what the price is. And Getty Images, surprisingly, they have great stuff, and surprisingly, they were very fair in dealing with me and actually cut me a break, because I said, there's some things that I'm like, okay, if I go to get this footage, it's too expensive. I will go to this other place and get stock footage, which is what I did for quite a bit of stuff. But Producers Library down in Burbank and Getty in Los Angeles, they were very good at understanding, like, there's an independent filmmaker rate, and if you're buying so many, we have a kind of a discount. And I had to do that. And then other things, I either put a filter on my iPhone and shot stuff to make it look like it was old. And then the person who co-wrote the original score is my friend since the second grade. He's also an illustrator. And my initial, there's some things you just don't have B-roll, right? We don't have B-roll of Rick Drayson and Ken Sprague eating breakfast at the Germans. And, there's no footage of that. So you're like, okay, well, we could do an animation of it. And then the budget, it's like, I don't even have money to do the animation. And my friend says I could do some renderings. He did some wonderful drawings. And then I would just do kind of like the Ken Burns move on him to kind of give it a little bit of movement. Yeah. And that's kind of how I pieced it together. And then there were let me see. I did Oddball Films, a gentleman up here in Marin County. He shot tons of stuff at Venice and Santa Monica in the late 70s into the early 80s. And he gave me a great rate. And so, it's the sourcing of it is it's a lot of work.
This is kind of random. I don't know if you told me this or where I heard this, but maybe it was in Ed's book. I don't think so. That it's a good thing that Joe Gold was not the owner when Butler and Gaines came calling to do Pumping Iron, because he would never have let them film in his gym. He was a crusty, cantankerous old man. Actually, he wasn't even that old at that time, but that's crazy. Do you believe that? Do you believe the movie would? Because where else would they have shot it? What other gym was there? Absolutely.
Well, that's it's fate, and it's like that Feather and Forrest Gump. There were so many, Charles Gaines had said it was like a series of dominoes falling. If one hadn't happened, the next one wouldn't. And he said it was a series of good luck events. And number one, how does Ken Sprague even end up with Golds? Joe Gold goes off to sea because the gym's not making money. Bud Danitz and Dave Sachs were losing their shirt, and Ken buys it. And because, Ken had a production stage, he was very amenable. He knew the value of it. And he actually, if you notice in Pump, if you've seen photos of the outside of Golds during Pumping Iron, it no longer even says Golds on. They put that wooden sign up there. If you see in the opening scene of Pumping Iron, there's like that jib shot or tracking shot, and you can see like that wooden sign. That was made for the movie because the gym was being converted was going to be converted into Ken's home. But he also said, because of the 16 millimeter cameras, they had those big two gigantic glass windows in the front. So they had to black them out. And, if you notice, so the entire front of Golds was white stucco or beige stucco at that point. Yeah. So And then Ken said, we had them install, he goes, I let them install a lighting grid in the gym. Just put a lighting grid up there, hang your lights. I know you need a lot of lights because this was, the 70s, 16 millimeter cameras.
Wow.
And have at it. And there's no way. I mean, I was a member, I joined World Gym in 79. I belonged to both Golds and Worlds for 1 year. And I saw Joe Gold cuss out Greg DeFaro one time for leaving a bar loaded. I mean, he was, I.
Yeah. Can I tell you the first time I ever met Joe Gold?
Sure.
Okay, so it was summer of 1988, and I was too scared to go train at Golds or World, but I said I want a tank top.
Yeah.
So I went up, to the main, was it Main Street that World Gym was on?
Yeah.
So, he went up the stairs, and at the very top of the stairs was the desk where Joe or one of his buddies was working, and they had the t-shirts and stuff behind them. And I was so scared. I don't know why I was so terrified, but I went up and Joe was at the counter with his arms folded. He gives me this, says, what do you want? I said, can I get one of those tank tops? I pointed to it was gray with like neon pink on it, with the gorilla and everything. He says, what size? I said, small, I guess. He goes, small's for midgets. Here's a medium. That's 10.95 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was my introduction to Joe Gold. He was a character.
My introduction to Joe, I had, Golds was moving, it was changing. I just kind of, I think I like the smaller space of the Golds on 2nd Street. When they moved Golds to Hampton, I'm like, wow, this is, it got even larger, but it was like really large. And World was kind of smaller and quiet. And I'm like, oh, I'll check it out. I kind of like it. So I joined, and Zabo signed me up, Zabo Kazuski, and him and Eddie were usually there. So I was a member, I don't know, a couple months maybe before I ever saw Joe. And I walk up the front steps because I parked underneath and walked up the front steps, and Joe Gold's there. And, I look, and he looks at me, and the first thing he says, he turns to Zabo, he goes, he looks like he owes me money. And I'm like, what the hell? I was like 18 years old. And Zabo says, no, the kid's paid up. He's good. He's like, well, I don't know. You keep an eye on him. And I'm like, and he's not joking. And I'm just like, wow. Well, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'll make a note. If my school schedule dictates, I'll make sure I'm here when Joe's not, because that was my introduction. And I can, he was, I mean, but it was, the gym was super clean. He would make sure that whoever Zabo or Eddie had doing the work for him, the mirrors were always clean, dumbbells were always in place. It was pretty quiet. No one dropped stuff,
No music allowed.
No music. Yeah.
It had that outdoor area, that patio it was all like, cement cinder blocks, but you could go out there. It'd be in the sunshine. You could smell the ocean. He had all kinds of weights. By the time I got there in 91, he had like hammer strength line out there. I think he had a cable unit out there. He had all the dumbbells, some benches. It was a pretty cool setup. That's one thing I want to ask you. So that I was there in the 90s. I consider like that wasn't really the golden era. The golden era was kind of already over by then. But what years, if you had to put a timeline, an exact year to start it, an exact year to finish, what would you consider the golden era of Venice Beach, Gold's Gym, World Gym?
Yeah, I'm going to get in trouble because, everyone, I try to say that my nostalgia is no more or less important than someone else's. But God, golden era, I don't know, maybe middle 60s into maybe the end of the 70s. I think only because that was believe me, I understand. And it's funny because I'm kind of my age. I probably would have been more of an 80s guy, right? Because that's when I was like in my early to mid 20s, and that would have been, but I think I just fell in love so much with the way Charles Gaines captured golds from that era that I fell in love with that. I just felt like, and Arnold was the top guy. And I don't know, it still had some sort of innocence to it. I would say that. I mean, but you know what? The 80s, in terms of the amount of quality competitors, I think was probably the best decade. There was not only, you had top-notch competitors in the 70s, In the 80s, you had guys who were as good or better and more of them. I think because of what happened in the 70s, so many people got fired up for it, and then Ed, Pete, and Tim with the Golds on Hampton kind of amplified it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would at least include the 80s in that, just because,
Oh, yeah.
Especially when I read Ed's book, it reminded me a lot of things of Gold's Gym became like a mainstream cultural icon in the 80s. Like Eddie Murphy he hosted the MTV Awards with a Gold's Gym leather jacket on one year.
Yeah.
Not even asked, they didn't pay him a dime. Free. So many actors, famous football, basketball, baseball players were in and out of that gym all the time. Real celebrities. And Gold's Gym became this trendy hip thing. And, Venice was still, it was still the Mecca. That's still where all the bodybuilders around the world really, I got to go there someday.
Right.
That's my dream. It was that California dream that Joe Weider sold in the magazines in the 60s. But yeah, I mean, what a time and a place. So yeah, I mean,
you talk about the t-shirts, and what got me to Gold's was reading an article on Rudy Hermosillo, who was the 77 teenage Mr. USA and then 78 teenage Mr. America. And then he was a bodyguard for Larry Flint and Sylvester Stallone. And when his stepdad, Dino, had put together a program for me. And I remember I went over to their house in Culver City, and they gave me a stack of Gold's Gym tank tops. Now, these were the ones from the era. They still had the original, not the bold line, but the kind of like this is like the retro one.
Yeah.
So it had that, and they were ribbed tank tops, and the font was like this. It said Gold's Gym, and underneath it said Santa Monica. And they just gave me a stack of them. Like, we have tons, and it's like, I'd work out, or it's like I'd be at home or where I was at, and I'd wear a Gold's Gym t-shirt or something. And like, people go, the hell's that? And this is even post pumping iron, to the general public. They're like, what the hell? And then by the early 80s, you couldn't go anywhere without, movie stars or celebrities wearing those,
And I remember, because in my early days of bodybuilding, I got into it around 87, 88. I was so desperate to always make sure people knew I was a bodybuilder. I had to always wear either a Gold's Gym t-shirt or sweatshirt or a T. Michael. Couldn't wear normal clothes because I wasn't big enough. They wouldn't know, but I was hoping that would give them the association. I think a lot of people did that.
Oh God. Yeah. Yeah.
Man. So who's your favorite interview? I know I don't want to put you on the spot, but who was the most interesting interview subject in the movie for you that you learned a lot of things that you had no idea of prior?
I'd say several. And I think one, Ken, because I had thought that he bought the gym from Joe. I mean, it's funny because Gold's Gym, when I think Ed and Pete and Tim sold to Brockway Moran, Gold's pretty much wrote Ken out of the history. I mean, it's like you walk into how many ever Gold's Gyms are today. If you walk into a Gold's Gym, there's a photo of Joe Gold, and but you don't hear anything about Ken Sprague, and you certainly don't hear anything about Bud Danitz or Dave Sachs. And so finding out that, I thought, oh yeah, I thought you bought it from Joe. And he's like, oh no, it's like Joe sold to Bud and Dave, and they, they were like, oh my God, we have to get rid of this place. We're going to have to shut it down. That was an interesting interview. Plus the fact that, Ken, was a scholarship athlete to University of Cincinnati. He's also an AAU Golden Gloves boxer, and then he holds several advanced degrees. So he's just is an interesting person. He's got a wider perspective. Charles Gaines was a fantastic interview as well, because learning. Here's all these things that had to happen, right? Like you said, pumping iron would have never been filmed if Joe Gold had owned the gym. He didn't think in those terms. He wasn't a businessman. and like Charles had talked about how hard it was for them to get Pumping Iron published. Like, I think he said he got turned down by his publisher. He goes, his book, Stay Hungry, the novel, had done really well, had won an award, was nominated for another book award. And he said he went to his publisher and they said, well, we're not going to publish this. They were talking like 1972, like, who's going to read this? You know, you're crazy. And I think he had to go to 2 or 3 different publishers. So you think of the odds of that having to happen, the odds of the gym finally falling into Ken Sprague's hands, them coming back a couple years later, shooting the movie. I mean, there's all these happenstances, you know, and then, you know.
Interesting. So, Mark, what is the status of the movie? Because now you got everyone intrigued. Where can they see it? Where are you hoping to get it distributed to, or just fill me in?
Yeah, you know, that's the $64,000 question now. I have had, I think ultimately the short answer, I will probably self-distribute and hopefully get some word out, you know, through you know, you and other people to the target audience, because I've had 3 production or distribution companies. I have not heard back from one. The other 2 have offered me a distribution deal, but they're very, very, they really don't favor me at all. It's basically, they want me to give them the movie for free. And once their costs are covered, I'll see some money. And I had I don't know if you ever saw the documentary Hoop Dreams.
I've seen parts of it.
Yeah, well, I had a conversation with the director a few weeks ago, and he had said, you know, the money you get up front from any distributor is pretty much the only money you'll ever see. Mm-hmm. So when he told me that, you know, that pretty much cinched the deal for me on the other 2 distributors. So I'm like, okay, well then I will probably have to put together a marketing plan to get some word of mouth out on social media, and then probably do either Amazon Prime or Film Hub and or Vimeo. I mean, that's,
I was gonna say, you know, and I think the streaming services, there's such a need for content now, content. There must be a lot of opportunities for someone who has a product, a good piece of content, to get it on, I don't know, Vimeo or on demand for, you know, because I see when I'm looking for movies sometimes, man, there's so many movies out there to look to choose from. So I think one of something's got to happen for one of those, but I'll certainly do my part with this, because I want this to be seen. I think it's a cool story. I was a little late to the game, didn't get there quite in time to be part of it like you were, but I always wish I had been. I always wish I'd been there during the Pumping Iron days in particular. That would have been just like, you know. Yeah.
I feel like I missed, you know, the original 1006 location, you know, because that had to have been just such a special time. You know, I was like, you know, a few months after it moved, you know, and I think a lot of people not many people know about the Santa Monica location, but that's kind of where a lot of the photos, you know, with, you know, Craig Dietz and Bill Dobbins and Reynolds and Zeller, you know, took a lot of shots in that gym. You know, that was kind of the big growth. You know, Pumping Iron was released when they were on 2nd Street, even though it was shot at Pacific Avenue. Yeah.
When did Hampton open up?
Hampton, I think it was 1980. Okay. I think when Pete and Tim and Ed moved it over there. And yeah, I mean, right. It was funny. I was down in Los Angeles back in December, and the 2nd Street location, it's a beautiful building. There's nothing in it. It's probably, the rent's probably too expensive.
Yeah, I'm sure. I can't even imagine what the rent on that place must be by now. Yeah. Man. So what is the best website or Instagram page? Actually, we'll have links on the description and everything, but just in case people are too lazy or they miss it somehow, what's the best way to keep track of the status of the film? What's the website?
Dreambigdoc.com. And let me double check that. Sorry to be so.
No, I think I looked at it. I think, check it though. Sounds right.
Yeah, dreambigdoc.com. Okay. And I'm on Twitter, but it's mostly Dream Big.
Okay. Do you have an Instagram page also?
And then that's a web page, and then a Facebook. There's a Dream Big Facebook page.
Okay, cool.
And I'll post some content on there. And then when I'm guessing it's pretty certain, unless something miraculous comes through from a distributor, I'll probably self-distribute. And in a way, it's kind of probably the way this should have happened anyway. Because it was such a homemade passion project that, yeah. So
I'd feel terrible if you just handed that over to somebody like that.
No,
anyway.
yeah, I wouldn't do that.
Come on, this has been 7 years, 7 years in the making, for goodness sake.
Yeah. I finished it officially in 2021, but yeah, I was like close to 6, and then the last year was tying up the loose ends with the letter of Arizona missions with the lawyer. Going everything like, okay, we have you have receipts for the clearance of your B-roll, and then anything that we didn't pay for that is fair use, we have to see if it clears the barriers for fair use. So, and I get that. I'm not stealing anything.
Right.
So
yeah, but man, I'm looking forward to watching it, Mark. Sounds like a very interesting little bit of history encapsulated in your film, and I'm hoping that the rest of the world, a lot of people get a chance to see this, because it is a cool story, especially for anyone that's part of this bodybuilding culture and world right now. A lot of the young guys have no idea that without all that, none of this would be there now. Literally, that era and those people in that gym, they paved the way for everything that we take for granted now with this industry that's so much bigger and so much multi-millions of dollars, billions of dollars.
No, absolutely. Pete Grimkowski, when he viewed the film, and he gave me a call, and he had said, okay, he goes, now you have to do the next part. And I said, yeah, I go, because I stopped in 79, right when Ken sold to those guys. And I said, Pete, I go, with you and Ed and Tim, I said, it would take me 2 movies just to get through the 80s, because, so much happened. It's like you'd have to go like 80 to 85, and then, part of 85 into, 1990, because I think that's when most people in the general public became aware of goals, I think.
Absolutely. And yeah, after reading it, Ed's book wasn't like 500, 600 pages, but good Lord, there was a lot. He went through a lot of material, a lot of stories, a lot of history, everything you could ever possibly want to know about Golds from when, he was part of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wish you the greatest of success with this film.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you.
It's something I'm very interested in myself. So appreciate you taking the time. Marc Martinez, director and producer of Dream Big. So everybody, thanks for watching Ronline Report. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, leave some comments for the algorithm, do all that good stuff, because we appreciate you. And we'll see you here next time.